When we think of Muslim-majority countries, stark contrasts come to mind. On one hand, there are nations like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, rich with oil wealth and modern infrastructure. Everyone's seen the videos of young entrepreneurs showing off the luxurious lifestyle these nations can provide. However, on the other hand, countries like Pakistan, Yemen, Jordan, Iraq, or Afghanistan struggle with poverty, instability, and underdevelopment. It's no secret that these Muslim-majority countries are simply left in the dust economically compared to the rest of the world. This leads to a pressing question: why are so many Muslim countries poor while others thrive? First, let's take a look at some concrete numbers. The average per capita GDP of Muslim-majority nations is $5,000 less than the global average. This gap becomes even more striking when we examine individual countries. Take Afghanistan, for example, where the per capita GDP is roughly $500, among the lowest in the world. Yemen, devastated by ongoing conflict and instability, fares only slightly better, with a per capita GDP of around $1,000. Pakistan, home to over 240 million people, struggles with a per capita GDP of just over $1,500, reflecting the challenges of sustaining a large population with limited industrial development and chronic political instability. Even relatively stable countries like Jordan have a per capita GDP of only around $4,000, far below the global average. These figures highlight the stark economic realities that many Muslim-majority countries face. Poverty and limited economic growth aren't just abstract problems, they affect millions of lives daily, creating cycles of deprivation that are hard to break. In stark contrast, oil-rich nations like Qatar and the UAE boast per capita GDPs exceeding $80,000 and $40,000, respectively. This enormous disparity underscores the uneven distribution of wealth within the Muslim world. But while countries like Qatar and the UAE benefit from their natural resource wealth, their economies are heavily reliant on oil and gas exports. This creates an uneven economic foundation, as wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few and fails to trickle down to the broader population. The wealth disparity among Muslim nations is enormous. On one end, you have nations with world-class infrastructure and lavish lifestyles, and on the other, countries grappling with hunger, unemployment, and underdevelopment. But why do some thrive while others falter? To answer this, we need to examine history, religion, geography, and governance. Let's start with Pakistan. When it gained independence alongside India in 1947, it had every reason to believe it could rival its neighbor economically and socially. Both nations inherited similar colonial systems, resources, and challenges. However, their paths diverged dramatically. India leaned into industrialization, technological advancement, and a system of secular governance that prioritized economic development. Pakistan, on the other hand, tied its identity closely to its Islamic foundations, often placing religious law above pragmatic reforms needed for economic growth. One Pakistani professor highlighted how this religious focus has, in many ways, impeded progress. The Quran itself promotes learning and adaptation, but conservative interpretations have often confined this learning to religious studies alone. This narrow focus has sidelined essential advancements in science, technology, and innovation, which are the pillars of modern economies. Instead of fostering a broad intellectual culture, the emphasis has often been on clerical education, leaving industries and modern sciences underdeveloped. Now consider a significant consequence of this approach: leaving half the population, women, out of the workforce. By excluding women from contributing to the economy, Pakistan and similar nations essentially cut their potential productivity in half. This isn't just a modern critique. It's an economic reality that stunts growth and limits societal progress. Europe faced a similar stagnation during the height of the Church's influence in the Middle Ages. Progress was stalled as rigid religious authority dictated societal norms. However, movements like the Reformation sparked a shift by challenging these entrenched ideologies. By questioning traditional authority and opening the door to new ideas, Europe paved the way for the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and ultimately, industrial and technological revolutions. This historical parallel offers a sobering lesson. Progress requires the willingness to adapt, challenge outdated norms, and embrace change, not as a rejection of identity, but as a path to collective betterment. For nations like Pakistan, the challenge lies in finding a balance between preserving cultural and religious values while fostering an environment that encourages innovation, inclusivity, and growth. Access to quality education is a significant hurdle. In countries like Afghanistan, the literacy rate stands at a mere 28%, reflecting decades of neglect in educational infrastructure and opportunities. In contrast, South Korea, a nation that emerged from colonization and war with limited resources, has transformed itself through strategic investments in education. Today, South Korea boasts a literacy rate of 99% and is a global leader in technology and manufacturing. The difference lies in prioritizing knowledge, innovation, and the development of human capital. Social norms in many Muslim-majority nations also play a role in hindering progress. Traditional practices often prioritize conformity over critical thinking and innovation. This rigidity can manifest in resistance to global trends in science, economics, and culture, leaving these countries struggling to compete in a rapidly evolving world. Modern industries thrive on adaptability and openness to change, qualities that are often stifled in environments where tradition takes precedence over progress. Another critical factor is governance. In many Muslim-majority nations, corruption and authoritarianism dominate the political landscape, stifling individual freedoms and economic growth. Leaders often prioritize maintaining power over addressing systemic issues like poverty, education, and infrastructure. This creates a cycle of stagnation, where even the most ambitious citizens lack the resources or opportunities to effect meaningful change. The stark contrast between nations like South Korea and countries like Afghanistan illustrates the impact of these challenges. While one invested in education, political freedom, and industrial growth, the other remains mired in conflict and underdevelopment. Addressing these systemic issues is essential for breaking the cycle of poverty and unlocking the potential of millions of people in these societies. History hasn't been kind to the Muslim world. During the Ottoman Empire, the printing press, arguably one of humanity's most transformative inventions, was banned for over 300 years. While Europe's literacy rates soared, the Ottoman Empire lagged behind. By 1800, literacy in England and Germany was above 50%, while in the Ottoman Empire, it hovered around 2 to 3%. Colonization further compounded the problem. European powers drained resources from Muslim nations, leaving them with broken institutions and economies. However, countries like South Korea show us that colonization isn't an insurmountable barrier. What's needed is political will and a vision for the future. Geography is undeniably a major factor in the economic struggles of many Muslim-majority countries. A significant number are located in arid or semi-arid regions, where resources like water are scarce and agricultural potential is limited. This creates immense challenges for sustaining livelihoods, developing industries, and ensuring food security. Countries like Afghanistan and Sudan, for example, grapple not only with political instability, but also with geographic constraints that make even basic development efforts a Herculean task. The scarcity of natural resources, coupled with the high costs of importing essentials like food and water, places an additional burden on these economies. However, geography alone does not dictate a nation's destiny. Norway, for instance, stands as a striking example of how countries can overcome geographic limitations. Despite its harsh winters, limited arable land, and relatively small population, Norway ranks among the wealthiest nations in the world. This success is largely due to strategic investments in education, innovation, and infrastructure. Norway capitalized on its natural resources, such as oil and gas, but unlike many resource-rich nations, it diversified its economy and established a sovereign wealth fund to ensure long-term stability. Lastly, perhaps the most significant barrier to progress in many Muslim-majority nations is governance. These countries are often ruled by monarchies or dictatorships, where maintaining power takes precedence over development. In such systems, political freedom is limited and property rights are insecure, leaving little incentive for citizens to invest in industry, innovation, or entrepreneurship. This creates an economic structure where a small elite controls vast wealth while the majority struggle to survive. Corruption thrives in this environment, further widening the gap between the rich and the poor and perpetuating cycles of inequality. Compounding this issue is the limitations of societal norms. In many Muslim-majority nations, topics such as sexuality, alcohol, and even art remain taboo. These restrictions suppress creativity, innovation, and open discourse, which are critical for cultural and economic growth. Additionally, the global reputation of some of these nations, shaped by stereotypes and negative perceptions, often isolates them from valuable economic partnerships and cultural exchanges. This isolation limits opportunities to learn from and collaborate with more developed nations, further entrenching the challenges they face. The combination of poor governance, economic inequality, and rigid societal norms creates a difficult environment for progress. Overcoming these barriers requires not just political reform, but also a cultural shift toward openness and inclusivity. So, what's the solution? While the answer isn't straightforward, it is clear that Muslim nations must embrace education, innovation, and inclusivity. Countries like Malaysia and the United Arab Emirates have successfully proven that balancing tradition with modernity is possible. The question is, will Muslim-majority countries learn to adapt, or will history continue to repeat itself as they continue to drive themselves into poverty? Let us know in the comment section below what you think. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.